Nom Nom delivers fresh food with whole ingredients backed by veterinarian science. Science tells us that a dog's health starts in the bowl, so improving their diet is one of the best ways to help them live a long and happy life. Nom Nom's food is full of proteins your dog loves and the vitamins and nutrients they need to thrive. All you have to do is order, pour, and serve. Ready to make the switch to fresh? Order Nom Nom today. Go to https://trynom.com/curveball and get 50% off your first order plus free shipping. That's https://trynom.com/curveball. Plus, Nom Nom comes with a money-back guarantee. If your dog's tail isn't wagging within 30 days, Nom Nom will refund your first order. No fillers, no nonsense, just Nom Nom. Welcome to the Living the Dream podcast with Curveball. If you believe, you can achieve. Welcome to the Living the Dream with Curveball podcast, a show where I interview guests that teach, motivate, and inspire. Today, we're going to be talking to Jamie Beebe. She is a television, film, and new media casting director. She's been a casting director for 10 years. She is a true crime podcast host, and she owns the Boyfriend Bikini Company. So we're going to be talking to her about everything that she's up to and about her story. So Jamie, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you for having me.
Why don't you start off by telling everybody a little bit about yourself?
Oh gosh, where do I start? You did pretty well. I do cast for TV and film and pretty much everything in between. I have a podcast called Strictly Stalking, where we interview victims of stalkers. And I just started a bikini company called the Boyfriend Bikini.
Okay, well, let's start off first by telling everybody about your casting career as a casting director. How did you get into it? And tell us about some of the work that you've done and that you're doing.
Sure. So I had no idea what I wanted to do with my life. And I was kind of doing a little bit of this and a little bit of that, a little bit of everything. I ended up in Los Angeles. I had a master's in music management, and I actually was going to manage bands. So I came out to Los Angeles to do that. And I started doing that and realized it was not for me. It's kind of like glorified babysitting of grown men, and I didn't want to do that. So I met a guy who was a child actor and decided that he wanted to be a director and have a production company. And he was like, well, why don't you just manage the production company? So I was like, sure, no problem, except that I had never even been on a set and had no idea how to do that. So I just started learning online everything there was to learn about production and, shooting things. And that's kind of how I learned it. I tried to hire the right people, and which I think I did. And I kind of learned from them. And I worked with that production company for a while. And when the production company kind of disbanded, I realized that casting was the part that I loved the most, mostly because everybody loves the casting director. When I call people, they're usually happy to hear from me because I'm offering them a job. So that's kind of what I wanted to get into, was casting. It's a little harder to jump into casting than I thought it would be. So I actually started out in reality TV because that was pretty easy to get into. And in reality, I've probably cast every show online or every show on TV that you can imagine, Dating and Afraid, Big Brother, all the dating shows, all the weird where you go to an island and meet people and all that kind of stuff. I've done all of those. And in the meantime, though, I had really wanted to get into scripted with TV and film. So what I would do, because I didn't really want to work for a company and work under somebody because the pay was so low and I had bills. So I would while I was doing reality shows, I would go to the university and all the film schools, and I would ask them if I could cast their projects. And pretty soon, as they started to graduate, and I learned that way, I learned a lot. And then as they started to graduate, they continued to hire me. So I was able to kind of get a name through that and grow with the people that I had met while they were in school. And then just by word of mouth, I started growing in that world. And pretty soon I was doing all scripted TV and film. And I've done a ton of great projects. More recently, I guess I don't know if it's super recent, but I did a TV show called Paradise City. I cast that. Great show. I think it's on Amazon Prime right now, the first season. It's great. It's got Bella Thorne, Andy Bierzak, Dre DeMatteo, Mark Boone Jr., tons of great people. And that's kind of how I ended up in casting.
Okay. Well, tell us about your true crime podcast, Strictly Stalking. Tell us what made you want to get into that, and how do you actually get the people on your show, the victims, to talk about what they've been through?
Sure. So right before COVID, I guess in 2020, I love true crime, everything true crime, and I love listening to podcasts. So I was listening to quite a few podcasts, and I really wanted to do one, although I had no idea how. And I called my business partner, and I was kind of complaining to him. I was like, well, I really want to do a good murder podcast, but there's so many. Everyone's already doing all the murders. There's, not enough murders to go around. Everything's been said. And he's very logical, and he likes to think things through, where I'm kind of the opposite. And he said, well, no one's really doing a podcast about stalking. And I was like, well, I don't know anything at all about stalking. I'm not going to do that, whatever. And because I'm very dramatic, I hung up on him. And but then, I started thinking about it, and he's right. No one was doing a podcast about stalking. And once I started researching, the crime of stalking and how horrific it is, and, more of what it is, I realize that there's, this whole crime out there that I really don't know anything about that's affecting millions and millions of people. So we decided to go ahead and try and do this podcast about stalking. And what we do is we invite people, survivors of stalkers, who are either going through it or have gone through it. And we have them come on the show and tell their story. And it's not something that's very talked about. There's not a lot of awareness about stalking. It's very hard to get justice if you are being stalked. And, most stalkers don't stop stalking you unless they die or go to prison. It's extremely hard to get a stalker in prison for stalking. And unfortunately, a lot of people, the end result can be death, murder, from stalking. It's kind of like slow murder, and it's a very traumatic, horrific thing to go through. So it is hard for people to come on the podcast and share their story, but we've been doing it now. We launched January of 2020, so it's been over 3 years. So luckily we have kind of our name is out there and people know who we are. So more people are coming forward, and it's really the only way to be able to change the laws and to get justice is to come forward and tell the stories and, create more awareness around it.
Absolutely. So the Boyfriend Bikini Company, to tell us about that and how you actually came up with that and what your company actually does.
Sure. So that one's a little different. So I was actually in a very abusive relationship for a long time, unfortunately, for about 7 years, which also ended right before COVID, luckily. And so when that ended, I was having kind of a hard time just getting back on my feet, because it's very hard for women to not only leave an abusive relationship, but then to, live their lives afterwards, because a lot of times you're kind of starting at zero. And so one of the one of the things I wanted to do was do everything that he told me I could not do, which was, travel the world and, make something important out of my life, make a difference in other people's lives. There was a lot of emotional abuse in that relationship as well. So I started traveling the world. I've traveled in the last 3.5 years or so to, probably at least 20 different countries by myself. And I love it. I love traveling. I try and travel at least once a month to a different country. Part of that, while I was traveling, I love those tropical locations and beaches. And I found myself buying bikinis all the time. And I've always loved bikinis. I've always kind of thought in the back of my mind how fun it would be to own a bikini company. So while I was buying all these bikinis, I realized that some of them were awesome. Some of them were not awesome. Some of them they fell apart right away, or they didn't fit right, or the top was great, but the bottom didn't work, whatever it was. And I kind of, consider myself an expert in the bikini world because of that. And so I wanted to just make one for myself, make like the perfect bikini for myself. And I realized that that's a lot of work. So I found a girl in Paris who helped me with the pattern, because I know nothing at all about bikinis building or patterns or sewing or anything like that. And then I went to Bali and found a company there that I wanted to work with. They're very ethically produced, and they pay their employees very well. And so when I was doing all that, I figured now's my time, and now's the time to make it into a business, since I'm doing it anyway. So I went to Bali this past January and picked up the shipment. Very happy with the shipment. I've got gorgeous bikinis, and I brought them back, and I launched it actually in the 3-year anniversary, Valentine's Day, of when I left my abusive relationship. And I call it the boyfriend bikini because I actually wanted to call it the ex-boyfriend, kind of in a negative way, I guess, about my ex and everything. And I told my girlfriend that, and she was like, "Why would you want to build something that's going to be so positive for you that you've dreamt about on something negative?" And I was like, "Wow, that's deep. You're right." So I tried to turn it around, and that way I call it the boyfriend bikini. And I name each style or color after a positive male influence that's been in my life. And, some of them are funny or cute or whatever. But overall, it's a positive type of men. So I have one called Daddy Issues, which I named after my father. I don't have daddy issues, but it's a cute name. And then when you buy a bikini, you get a little story about the type of guy that it's named after. So you get kind of like a little story about my dad, really. I have one named after my brother called The Little Brother, and you get like a little story about my little brother. And then part of the proceeds goes to the National Coalition Against Domestic Violence. And that's kind of where I put that negative energy in and made it into a positive thing.
That's great. That's absolutely amazing.
Thank you.
Well, tell us what Jamie's got upcoming or going on, other than everything else that you told us that we need to know about.
Sure. Lots of traveling coming up. I've promised my dog I would go on a road trip rather than hit up another country. So I do plan on going on a road trip soon with my dog. And other than that, I'm working on a second podcast, actually, called The Last Trip. And it's about people who get murdered or go missing on vacation. And then I tell that story. Obviously, they're not here to tell it, but in hopes to, find maybe more, get justice for that person, be able to find that person, asking for anybody out there that might have any information about the case or the person to come forward. So I go through their story and then talk about how we can hopefully find them, where you can go to, if you have any information or anything like that. So I've been working very hard on that podcast, and it should be out somewhat soon. In the next month or two, I plan on releasing some episodes. So I'm excited about that. And it kind of ties everything together with my love of true crime and travel and my bikinis. So it's kind of come full circle finally.
Well, so everybody can keep up with everything that you're up to. purchase bikinis if they want, check out your podcast, throw out your contact information.
For sure. So I'm on Instagram. My personal Instagram is feathergirl77. And anyone can reach out and find me there. The Instagram for my podcast, Strictly Stalking, is Strictly Stalking Pod. And, if you have a stalking story that you'd like to share or need information or help, if you have a stalker or just, want to get more information and listen to the show, that's again, Strictly Stalking Pod. And then my bikini company, like you said, is called The Boyfriend Bikini, and the website is theboyfriendbikini.com, and the Instagram is at The Boyfriend Bikini.
All right. We'll close this out with some final thoughts. Maybe something I forgot to talk about that you would like to touch on, or just any final thoughts you have for the listeners.
Oh, gosh. Well, I know a lot of times, people want to know any advice that I would have for like my younger self or something like that. I was asked that the other day, so that's kind of on my mind. And what I would say is, especially for women in this world, I think that it's really important that you always stand up for yourself and hold your values close. So, you don't have to take anyone's crap. You don't have to do what people say just because it's expected of you. And I think along those same lines, like I would have stayed single for, until I was like 40. I think that, everything kind of happens as it should and as it is. But I think that things maybe would have happened a little quicker in a different way if I had stayed single. And I think it's okay to be single. And wait, until you find the right person, until you're at a great point in your life where you want to be with someone. Until you're happy being alone, you can't really, I think, be with somebody else and keep that same happiness. You look for somebody that can help you out and bring you up rather than somebody that would like, quote unquote, make you happy. So I think, just stand up for yourself and do what you want to do and don't give up.
Great message. Ladies and gentlemen, theboyfriendbikini.com. Be sure to check out the website and check out everything that Jamie's up to. Fellas, maybe you can hook your ladies up with some bikinis from Jamie.
That would be great.
Absolutely. If you have any guests or suggestion topics, send them to cjackson102@cox.net. As always, thank you for listening. And Jamie, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been great.
For more information on the Living the Dream podcast, visit www.djcurveball.com. Until next time, stay focused on living the dream.